Hi, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Adam Golov, Marketing and Communications Manager at Data Conversion Laboratory, and I will be your moderator today. Before we get started, I want to let you know we will allow for time at the end of the webinar for Q&A, so please write your questions in the chat area as they come to mind. If we don't have time to answer all of them, we will make them available on our website. Next slide, please. For those of you who are not familiar with DCL, we convert and organize content to create electronic documents, populate databases, publish on the web, and basically get it ready for tomorrow's technology. Next slide, please. DCL services help you refine your document conversion strategy, identify document redundancy, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs, today and in the future. We serve a very broad client base. Next slide, please. Spanning all industries. Next slide, please. Today, we are thrilled to introduce Ann Rockley. Ann is the CEO of the Rockley Group, and she has an international reputation for developing content strategies, content management, and digital publishing solutions. Ann has been instrumental in establishing the field in content strategy, content reuse, content management, and intelligent content strategies for multi-channel delivery. Ann has more than 15 years experience with a wide variety of pharmaceutical, medical devices, and healthcare companies. She freely gives her time and knowledge in the development and education and industry best practices. Known as the mother of content strategy, she introduced the concept of content strategy with her best-selling book, Managing Enterprise Content, a Unified Content Strategy, now in its second edition. Ann has been ranked among the top 5 most influential content strategists. Our session today will be providing insights into the challenges you face with your content based on the results of a recent survey conducted by the Rockley Group and Data Conversion Laboratory. Without further ado, welcome Ann Rockley.
Thank you, Adam. So just briefly, these are the kinds of companies that we have worked with in life sciences. And so looking at it from medical devices, pharma, biotech, healthcare providers, all sorts of different types of companies. We're really excited to present the results of the survey. We decided that a survey was needed. We started to look at some of the different companies and what were they trying to do and see if there were any trends. And we're putting on a conference. You'll see some information about it at the end of the webinar about content and intelligent content in life sciences and healthcare. And we wanted to make sure that we could position the sessions, the presentations, for our attendees most effectively. And so through the survey, we're able to identify that information. And when we're working with different companies, we've seen a lot of different things, in particular the increasing and rapidly changing regulatory requirements. They're always changing all the time, and when you've got a global product, then it's changing not just in one region, but differently in different regions. We're seeing a huge growth in the area of healthcare. We have an aging population. We have a lot of people that need to use the healthcare system today, and they need to use it most effectively. It's a really fast-paced environment. Things are changing almost daily in what people are doing. And more there's growing pressure on resources. There's never enough people. There's never enough time to do all the things that we need to do. And so it's getting really stressful in that way. Well, when we look at all of these challenges, there's a huge emphasis on the content. They play a role in every aspect of healthcare. And we wanted to know what those challenges were so that we can begin to address the challenges. And we'll be addressing the challenges in a variety of different ways. One is with the conference, as I mentioned, and there'll also be a follow-up series of articles and potentially some future webinars. So let's get right into the survey. The first thing that we did was we asked people what industry area they were from. And in general, we had sort of a big bucket called healthcare. And when we look at the people who identified themselves as healthcare, we are looking at hospitals, we're looking at insurance, we're looking at a variety of different aspects of healthcare which touch physicians and patients all the way through the health life cycle. Next to that, we had about 28% that were medical devices. That was sort of our next largest group. And medical devices are growing. We're seeing a lot of new medical devices be approved. And one of the things that we're seeing in medical devices is that many of the regulatory requirements of the pharmaceutical industry is now being placed on the medical device industry. And so that is putting additional pressure in terms of them managing their content. We also have medical publishing. So those are journals. We're seeing also textbooks. We're seeing a variety of different areas. And interestingly enough, the next one in the area is pharmaceutical. And personally, I would have expected to see pharmaceutical a little higher in terms of the industry area. And I think that as we continue to do this survey on an annual basis, that we will see the growth in that area because huge impact in pharmaceuticals when you talk about content, all the clinical, which is the same as medical devices as well. So they've got the clinical, the labeling, the customer engagement, training, all sorts of different things. In the other, we saw health insurance. A couple of people from health analytics areas responded, health research. We had from the veterinary field as well who responded. And so the whole area of content is everywhere in everything that we do for healthcare today. So we then asked, what kind of content do you create? And you can see that the biggest area is other, and I'll come back to that one. But we had clinical, and clinical documents being the information that is part of the approval cycle for both medical devices, pharma, and biotech. So a great deal of emphasis in that area. We then see labeling. So I always sort of think of when I'm thinking about content, and of course there's many different aspects of it here, but we kind of have the behind the scenes, the whole clinical set of information as we pointed out first here. Then there's the labeling. So clinical, you get approval. Content then is created that goes along with be it the medical device or the pharmaceutical or any other type of healthcare product, which says all of the different pieces of information that someone needs to know about that product or drug compound. And from that, we then, that content gets reused again frequently in customer engagement or in marketing, which you can see is in the third area. So we're seeing the transition of content all the way through that life cycle for the product. We're seeing other areas where content is playing a big role. Research, you see that's at 7.9%. Medical communications. And medical communications for most companies is the customer contact, where they are responding to customer questions and providing support and information to the customer. So a lot of content goes back and forth in that area. We also see a number of the respondents were developing training materials. And training is absolutely crucial to ensure that every customer base is trained, be it a physician, a healthcare provider, the patients themselves, the users of whatever type of product or service that we're sharing with them. So training does play a large part. We also see quality, and quality is ensuring that both manufacturing as well as content and any other piece of information is accurate, consistent, safe, that we're communicating the correct information. So you can see that we have a lot of different areas. Now when we take a look at where else, so that big other pot, and there's quite a few in there, but just some of those that I sort of pulled out from that long list of other types of content that's being created is things like software documentation, because, well, we may not think about it, but software goes along with medical devices, or software goes into hospitals or into HMOs or into a variety of different places. So we've got the documentation, the help, and the user access materials all in that area. We also had a number of respondents that are providing health tips to people to help them with behavioral change. So ensuring that they have the right information to make the right decisions. Maybe it's about diabetes, maybe it's about weight loss. It could be any particular disease or condition or health situation that a customer or patient finds themselves in, and sharing that information with them. So we had a number of people who responded in that area. We also had a fair amount of response in patient and physician education. So more specific when we're talking about training. And then also standard operating procedures. Standard operating procedures for those that develop health care products are extremely important to ensure consistency of process, to ensure that quality is being ensured, and to be able to prove to a regulatory body that everything is being managed in every aspect of the organization. So then we asked, well, who is creating the content? I know myself, when I go into organizations, I see a variety of different types of people who create that content. By far the largest are writers. We've got about 42% here that are writers, whether they be permanent writers or contract writers. And again, I'm going to skip over other and come back to that one. But also stakeholders or subject matter experts. More and more, I'm finding that when I go into the organization, it isn't the job of someone who considers themselves a writer. It is part of a stakeholder or a subject matter expert's job, role, to create, to edit, to review that content. So much more emphasis into, they're moving it more so into the writing and not just sitting, just looking at it and reviewing it as it goes through. And that places additional pressures in terms of content creation because, and I'm using air quotes here, that's not their real job. I mean, they may be a clinician, they may be a researcher, they may be a physician, they may be someone else in the organization, and they have many other different duties. So the fact that we're beginning to rely on these people more and more raises some challenges and stresses within the organization. We see that marketing communications, 14.4%, that area creates content, and we're all very aware of all that different type of content that is being created to support the marketing and content marketing activities. There's a smaller amount, 2.2%, are instructional designers who are responsible for creating the training materials. And also took a look at that other piece, and we found that they named some of the roles, domain experts, which could as well be subject matter experts. There were a number of responses for nurse educators, and we've seen that a lot as well with the work that we've done, that nurses and in fact pharmacists are playing a bigger role in creating content and educating people with that information. We're also seeing knowledge experts and researchers as part of that other pot that people identified. And we also asked whether organizations had a content strategy. And you can see that by far the majority say that they have, 44.6% say they have a content strategy. And when we think of what is a content strategy as we're looking at this question, and it is an organization has taken the time and put together a plan to identify what kind of content they need to create, who is that content for, who is responsible for creating that content, and how they go about most effectively creating that content. And the how has many different aspects. So how is it structured? How is it organized? What tone of voice is it using? What channel is it going out into? Going out in the web? Is it going out to print? Is it going out on mobile? Is it going out on all of those? All sorts of things like that. So when an organization says that they have a content strategy in place, they have worked towards answering all those questions, and they have processes to ensure that content is created in the most effective way. Now, just under 30% of the respondents do not have a content strategy at this point in time. So they have not worked through that. And about, just slightly under that, about 25% are currently considering creating a content strategy. And there were some questions associated with this as well, where people were asking more about what is a content strategy and what is most important for me to address to ensure that we're creating and managing and delivering our content most effectively. We asked our respondents to give us some sense of how, what the concerns were in terms of their content and how they were managing their content. And again, we can see at the top of the pyramid, which is the majority of people, so 46%, were with regulatory requirements. And again, that is because without addressing regulatory requirements, your product cannot make it to market. It cannot be approved. It cannot go out to your customer base. And there are many different changes that happen on an ongoing basis that are associated with regulating your product and therefore regulating your content. It can be warnings, it can be cautions, it can be contraindications that you need to include, so reasons why you might not want to do this, or better communication in the way that we share the information. Things like privacy concerns in terms of communicating to people. So that one was the most widely selected here in terms of people's responses. The next one, which is not much less than that, and that's time to market. For those creating products in the healthcare industry, there is always a huge concern in terms of how long it takes to get something from concept through to approval and they're off into the marketplace. And a lot of content is created throughout the life cycle, but it's always in the last couple of years where it really, really intensifies as the content needs to respond, again, to the regulatory, and be prepared to communicate with customers. And if you're in, say, so you're not in the product side, be it drug or biotech or medical device, but if you're in the other side in we've worked a lot with hospitals and with people, as I said, who communicate behavioral change information. You need to be able to get information out as rapidly as possible to address any concerns or issues. So time to market or time to get that out there is really important. Version control is the same as time to market. And we have often seen this as an issue, particularly when an organization does not have a content management system or a particularly rigorous way. So content is often shared with people, with reviewers, in email, for example. And the question always is, do I have the latest version of this information? Is this the most accurate version? Is this a signed off version? There's also issues when it's stored in a document repository where the content isn't versioned, and you're possibly going back in and you're going to take some of that content and reuse it or build a new iteration of the information, and you're never quite sure if you have that latest version. And when you don't have the correct version and the incorrect version gets released, that can cause huge problems in the field. It can be inaccurate. It can not be correct in the sense it has not been approved. It could be out of date. And I've seen companies redo a lot of work because wrong versions were picked up, and then it was like, oh, we have to backtrack now. And we have to put in all of those changes that we had previously. The next one in this pyramid, the publishing, we're seeing more and more emphasis on the issues of publishing, particularly in the last few years as mobile has become more important, a way to deliver content. And so trying to find ways of publishing to print and publishing to the web and publishing to different types of mobile devices, Android versus Apple iOS, and tablets versus smartphones. And there's a lot of things that a company needs to think about and be aware of and put automated processes in place to ensure that when content is published, it's published effectively and correctly to all the different channels. We also have, as a big chunk, just over 28% here with translation. And it used to be when we talked to companies, they, no, we're English only. We don't have a lot of translation. That's very, very, very rare now. We see most companies are translating into 2, 3, 4 languages, and as a product goes global, then translation becomes even a greater issue. We talk with the EU, 26, 27, and always growing to different languages. And if you have a product that is being used, say, in a hospital situation or being used by a customer, like an actual patient, say for example, maybe a blood glucose monitor or something of that nature, it's really, really important that the content be in their native language. It's hard enough understanding how to use healthcare products without having to figure it out in a foreign language. So translation is becoming key, and translation is tied to regulatory requirements in that different regions have different regulatory requirements which impact the content, which impact the localization of that content. So information needs to change and reflect the actual regulatory region that it's being distributed in. So it goes well beyond just translating it into another language, but in ensuring that it meets the local requirements and it communicates in a way which makes sense to someone in that region. We had about 1/4 being other, and some of what was listed in the other was also answered in the next question, so I'm going to address that more in the next question. But the last one here, supporting claims. There, over the years, different companies have made claims that there's product, whatever it is faster, it's more efficient, it's 2 times stronger, it's something where they claim that something is true or different about that. And we see this in all sorts of different areas. So it can be as a, as I said, pharma, medical device, or it could be food where you're claiming that it reduces cholesterol or something of that nature. And it is no longer acceptable to simply say these sorts of things. The regulatory agencies have said, no, you can't say you're 2 times faster until you can prove to us that you are 2 times faster than the competition or other products that are out there. You can't say that it does something unless you have proven it and you have research that supports that. So when you think of all the different types of content that we have, and you need to ensure that each and every piece of content is supported with the claim, so we can actually say, okay, this usage, yes, you could use it for this or not use it for that, or you should do this or you shouldn't do that. If it's a behavioral change, we can point back to the research that supports that. And that has to be part of any review prior to final release for the content. And if you reuse content, it's incredibly important that also the claims that are there to support that content go along with that reuse, so you don't have to refigure out each and every time you review a different piece of content, potentially for a different audience or, as I said, different region, those sorts of things, that is attached. And speaking of regions, different regulatory agencies require research that is specific to their region in addition to other research. So there's a lot that has to go along with any piece of content to say, we're saying this, and we're saying this because it's based on this reference, this research. So along with that other that I was mentioning just a minute ago, we asked where the greatest costs lie in managing their content today. And quite interesting, over 50% indicated multiple channel delivery. So that's the print and the web and the mobile devices. Trying to get that content out to all of those different channels. And being able to ensure that it's done without having to re-engineer the content has ranked very high here. Also as high, 45% is the customer response, meaning companies are finding it particularly challenging that be there a question, be it a problem, be it something that is coming to them from a customer that they need to respond to. It's very, very difficult for them to be able to get the right content out to answer that question, to address the problem, to address the issue, to clarify what has already been presented or putting it in a different way. So the need to respond quickly to customer feedback is very, very important. I talked about earlier the issues of multiple versions. And to just sort of expand upon that and sort of to tie it into the multiple channel delivery, when we go into an organization, we often see that the content is managed in the channel as a silo. So if you have web content, it's separate from the content that might be going out in print, which is separate from the content that is going out into the mobile devices, so that if you need to update that content, and you always need to update or change or modify that content, it's very difficult to do that when content is siloed in a delivery channel. And it's very difficult, as I said earlier, to really know, do I have the latest? Do I have the greatest? Do I have the signed off version? Is it complete? All those sorts of questions. When you're doing a lot of this manually, and many, many companies do it manually, then it makes it really hard, and you really have to rely on very good processes within the organization to ensure that you manage those versions correctly. Again, we have regulatory requirements, which I won't go back to. We also have the translation. So regulatory requirements and translation are up there in terms of the costs and the issues of tracking and keeping that information in control. Now, I took a look at some of the other that people had identified here. One was lack of ownership. It's often unclear who owns the content, and therefore if there is a problem with the content, who do you go back to get that content updated, or who is responsible for ensuring that content is accurate? And hey, if a piece of content does get out of date, who just needs to be responsible for it? And too often what we see is that content gets created and then we're rushing on to our next activity or next set of content creation, and we're not really thinking about what was created before. And old content can be a serious issue in the healthcare industry. I mean, it's so easy to pick up the wrong content that's old, that has expired, that doesn't have the most recent information, because that can perpetuate errors and issues and inconsistencies and people not being able to understand things. So ownership is a big deal. Content governance was another one that people mentioned as part of the other. And when we think of governance, that is the content control. And who, as we said, who owns it, then you may have a different person who's creating the content versus the one who owns it. Who's allowed to change it? Who is allowed to update it? Who's allowed to say it is approved and we can release it? So there's a lot of issues, and in particular, if you do not have a content strategy in place, there are typically a lot of problems with governance because there's no clear-cut process for how you need to be managing that content through its life cycle. One of the other ones that a couple people mentioned was, how do you balance, or one of the things that was costing them money was balancing the issues of wanting to have your content in such a way that it made it easy for the organization to create it and manage it, but at the same time making it friendly and easy to access by your customers. And there sometimes is a disconnect. So what is easy for the sort of behind the scenes, maybe how you organize it, how you tag it with metadata for retrieval, does not make sense to your customers, does not make sense to the people who use your products and services. And so trying to balance that is one of the issues that a couple of people mentioned. We also had complicated reviews, or reviews in general, mentioned by some of the respondents. And with reviews, there obviously is a life cycle associated with that. But there can be many different people with many different roles, with different levels of authority on the content. And it can be difficult to transition that, particularly if you come from the writer role and you're working with many different subject matter experts, stakeholders, a variety of different people to get consensus on reviews and to make sure that the feedback is being correctly incorporated into the content, and that we are reconciling differences among different reviewers on what should be included and what should not be included. So that could be quite challenging for many companies. And then again, we see the issue of tracking claims as one area that costs a lot of money. There could be time too. Doesn't have to be. Of course, time is money, but different ways of looking at how you measure cost. So sort of following along on the previous question, what specific issues currently affect your organization's content? And I think it does tie in quite well with the answers to the previous one. So different formats. So that's all your print, mobile, and web. The 55.4%. That's huge. That really shows how challenging that can be. And sorry, I've got that wrong. I have the inconsistencies. No, they're quite close. Talking too much here. So yes, the different formats, 56.1%, and then the inconsistencies, which is 55%. They're almost on par. So if you've got a lot of people working on content, you're using content being updated from different versions, you've got different ways that people do things, content can get inconsistent. And if you've got your content in all those different silos, in terms of channel and trying to make sure the content is consistent in all of those channels, you can also introduce inconsistencies there as well. We have reuse as an indicator of areas of specific issues. So there's the whole, and I don't call it reuse, but where people used to copy and paste. Let's still do copy and paste. When you copy and paste, you are not reusing content. You are copying and pasting content. And the reason you're not reusing content is because your pasted version is now separate from the original content. And when the original changes, then the pasted version is not kept up to date. So you have those inconsistencies. But even when you're reusing content, so where you're saying, okay, I'm going to point to a particular instance of information, and I want to ensure that it gets reused in multiple places, it can get complicated if it's not well thought through initially in your content strategy. So maybe one version of your content has one set of information, but a different version of your content. So this is an approved version versus a work in progress version. So do you automatically update different sets of reuse, or do you need to notify people about reuse? Do you need to reuse really teeny tiny pieces of information? Are you reusing whole blocks of information? And so it can be challenging to do that, and especially if you don't plan well for it. We have inaccuracies. So this is where the content is inaccurate. And there can be a lot of different reasons for this. This could be you've pulled the wrong version. It could be that it was missed in the review cycle. It could be because it's inconsistent. And so you've got inaccurate content in some of those locations. So trying to ensure that content is accurate all the time is challenging. We then see that followed by translation. And translation, as I mentioned earlier, is an issue. Some of the issues that we see with translation are when a company is producing content, they wait until the source language, often English, but not always, is reviewed and approved before it goes out for translation. And then you've got the issue of translation lagging behind. In other cases, they may keep sending it out, and then it changes in the source, and it's got to change in the translation. So there could be that issue. We've seen issues of in-country reviewers, the right people to review the content to say, yes, this has been correctly translated. Yes, you're using the right words for our region. Yes, you've got the right emphasis of the priority of the different types of content correct. So there are many issues associated with translation. And then what's the other? And again, we heard some of the things like governance and ownership and things like that as being an issue for the organization. This one, a little bit busy, I know that, so give me a second here. What we did was, how do you currently reuse your content, and how do you want to reuse your content? So the left-hand side is showing how you currently do it, the right-hand side is how you want to do it. And so we're seeing some fairly high numbers in things like multi-channel. So sorry, I just had someone walk in and it's like, nope, sorry, you can't come in. The print to web and mobile, that's how they are reusing it. But you notice on the other side, 48%, even more, want to do that and are not currently doing that. And so we see that across the board in a variety of different areas. So we've got, they're reusing it across products or product families, but again, it's higher the opportunity between product versions, higher they want to do it, between therapies, between clinical and labeling. That's fairly small there, and that's often because the content has to be rewritten for the information. And so just jumping down there, we see some of the other ones. I think that, where'd it go? Lost my train. There it is. Some of the other ones where we see a really strong desire to reuse content is between content marketing offerings. And then those that don't reuse content, fairly small, and don't plan to reuse content. And I find that really interesting that some people don't plan to reuse content, because we found, and this is on average, but it can be a whole lot higher, where we see a minimum of 25% opportunity to reuse content. And when you start to get into some of the other things that are listed there, product families between different audiences and personas, physicians, healthcare workers, patients, that sort of thing, it can get 60%. It can, it can be quite high. So the fact that they're not seeing any opportunities or planning to reuse content, I find quite interesting. And the last of the questions here, at least I think it's the last one, how do you create your content? And I am not at all surprised that 68% of you said you do it in Microsoft Word. That is by far the most common tool that we typically see being used within the organization to create content. Now that poses a challenge and an issue because Microsoft Word is not necessarily the best tool to publish it, to get it out to all those different channels that you want to get it out to structure it, unless you're using a structured plugin for it, which would make your content more intelligent. We see a fairly high number here with InDesign, Adobe InDesign, so both from the print side, where the content is being created directly in InDesign, or it's being used and pushed from InDesign to the web and to other channels. InDesign is, from my perspective, it's a great output tool, but from a creation perspective, extremely challenging because it really requires a very specific set of knowledge, and not everyone has access to it, so it is difficult. And changing anything, if you need to change it rapidly, can be challenging. So I like to see InDesign used as an output tool when we push to it, but having it as a creation tool can often be challenging. So then very similar to that in the HTML, and again, it's an output, or it should be, because, boy, trying to go to print from HTML just doesn't work. And trying to go from print to HTML does not work effectively. So just all of these pose challenges. We see about 28% of you are in XML and a particular flavor of XML called DITA. And that will allow the organization to be more intelligent in how you create, manage, and deliver that content. In the other, there were all sorts of different things. I mean, Excel spreadsheets came up fairly often. So. Oh, and we also have Adobe FrameMaker. So that's what we saw, and as I said at the beginning of the webinar, we're going to be doing some more detailed sharing of the results. This is the first, and it'll be followed up by an article, and then our goal is to have something like a white paper or that is available as an ebook with even more detail in the future. So we'll be putting those out. And in terms of my background and what I do in helping companies to produce more effective content, we have a book that I've written which could help you with some of the challenges that we've identified here, managing enterprise content. But I most want to talk about the Life Sciences and Healthcare Conference. I literally just finished our annual Intelligent Content Conference. It was last week in San Jose. And we're spinning off a specific version of that conference for May of this year, and it's going to be in San Francisco, and to focus on those challenges and issues that are unique to the life sciences and healthcare field. And we have accepted a number of speakers to that conference, and we are still actively pursuing a few additional speakers as well, based on what we heard here in terms of the challenges that you're facing. And we will be doing a draw. A number of people who responded to the survey will be pulling a free ticket to attend that conference. So hopefully you'll join us then. So this now open to questions, and you've got our contact information there on the slide in front if you want to email us or phone us or however you want to communicate. So I will turn it back to you, Adam, and maybe you could let me know what kind of questions we've had come in.
Sure. Well, thank you, Anne. This has been very informative indeed. I'm just going to open it up now for questions, so please feel free to send us through the chat function. We're just going to give a couple of moments to let them come in. We have about time for about 10 to 15 minutes worth of Q&A. Okay, so Anne, the first question, and the first question is, what are some of the challenges that one face when one faces reusing without a content management strategy in place?
Okay, so what are the challenges associated with essentially manually reusing content? If you're manually reusing content, there's a couple of challenges. One is knowing where that content is to reuse it. So if it's buried in your information set, it can be really hard to find it and then to reuse it. And if you've got multiple writers who are just sort of ad hoc reusing content, they could be reusing content out of context. The other challenge is that you may not have as much flexibility in terms of reusing content because the content management system often adds to the ways in which you can reuse content. So that may be a challenge for you. But I think the biggest by far is finding it and making it easily accessible to the people who are going to reuse the content so they can then go and find it and reuse it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Another question that just came in is, are there any effects for not reusing content?
Yes, there's a lot of effects for not reusing content. And that's why I was a little bit surprised when I saw some were not even intending on doing it. Content is never 100% unique. Never. There are simple things that are in common. So it may be that, I don't know, let's say you create a blood glucose meter for customers, and you've got multiple ones, because I don't know any company that has just one. Well, there's a variety of different things that might talk about hypoglycemia, for example, low blood sugar. Well, if you write it, and then somebody else writes it, and somebody else writes it, and somebody else writes it, you're going to have 3 or 4 or 10 or however many. The worst I've seen, and not for that particular example, but in one company, was 56 different versions of a particular definition or explanation of something. So if you do that, then you're proliferating a variety of different sets of information, and they may not all communicate effectively to your customer. If you have to update it, there's no way you will find all the occurrences and permutations of that content to update it. And if you translate it, you will be translating each and every single instance of that content. And even if you copied and pasted it once before, believe me, once it's gone through 2 or 3 iterations, something as small as a comma difference will cost you money, and it will cost you to retranslate it. We find that translation, the cost of translation, is one of the biggest returns on investment for moving towards reuse. And we've seen companies get 25% return on investment, 30%, 50%. We had one company, it's a few years ago, but they were actually written up by Gartner, and they had 270% return on investment simply by reusing content, and it reduced their translation bill that much. It was huge. So there are issues to not reusing content. It doesn't mean that every single piece of content is reused, but there generally is a chunk of content that is and should be reused.
Thank you, Ann. One more question is, you are referring to content strategies, but you must see very depths of these. Could you define what a good depth of strategy would be?
Yes, what is a good content strategy? Well, it has many, many different aspects to a good content strategy. So if we look at just the content itself, it should include a clear definition of the content models or structures, the way that content should be put together, so that every time you create X, whatever X happens to be, it's always structured in the same way. And that you have guidelines associated with that that say it should always be written with a certain tone of voice and a certain type of usage for writing, so structured writing guidelines. And it should preferably include a reuse strategy, which says very clearly that these are the types of content that are reused, and when do you reuse them. So it's okay to reuse it between, say, products, but you might not reuse the same content identically between what a physician gets and what a patient gets, because the patient may not understand it. So it's got all of these rules associated with it, and how big a chunk and how small a chunk. We don't want everybody reusing fragments of sentences, because it gets really hard to manage the content when it's tiny like that. So all of that goes into it. In addition to that, we like to see who owns the content. We want to know what the workflow is associated with each and every piece of content. So how is it created? How is it reviewed? How is it approved? How is it aged off? How do you say, okay, this is no longer valid? How do you review it 6 months, a year later, so that you can say that it is still accurate? How do you get rid of it? How do you purge it? How do you archive it? Everything associated with that. We like to see metadata, which says, now of course this is mainly associated with content management system, but if I'm going to create all this content, how do I tag it with metadata so I can find it later on? How do I tag it so I can do something automatic with it? So we want that piece as well. Typically, a good content strategy has a change management, a plan of action in it, because it's, when people start to follow a new process, they need to understand how to do that. So there's a variety of different aspects to a good content strategy. Governance, that's a biggie. Who's allowed to do something to the content so it isn't changed arbitrarily. So that's just a few.
Well, thank you, Ann. We still have some time for a couple more questions. Please, if you have a question, send them through the chat function. While we're waiting to some, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for attending. Our next scheduled webinar will be on Thursday, March 27th. It is rebranding content during a migration. Step 3, Fun for the Whole Team, presented by Molly Mesabov, content strategist and UX consultant. And this time, do we have any more questions? Well, thank you, everybody. This has been a great webinar, and we look forward to seeing you again on the 27th. And thank you, Ann, for this informative webinar.
Thank you all. Bye.